Jaylen Brooks stood at the heart of O'Hare International Airport, a stark contrast to the busy travelers around him. His sneakers scuffed against the polished floor, and the faint hum of his black carry-on rolling behind him was the only sound that stood out in the chaotic rhythm of the terminal. The sharp, metallic scent of jet fuel mixed with the bitter aroma of burnt coffee wafting from a nearby kiosk. Despite the energy pulsing through the space, Jaylen seemed detached, as though he were in another world altogether. At 42, Jaylen was a man who had clawed his way to the top, a billionaire and owner of Apex Airlines. Yet today, he wasn't dressed in tailored suits or flaunting his wealth. Instead, he wore a faded hoodie, well-worn jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low to hide his identity. For a moment, he was just another face in the crowd, blending in with the hurried business travelers, the families wrangling toddlers, and the solo backpackers rushing to catch their flights. No one noticed the quiet power he carried with him, the empire that ran above the heads of these passengers. But Jaylen wasn't here as the CEO of Apex Airlines. No, today he was a test subject, a man seeking the truth behind the customer experience of his own airline. As the man who had built Apex from the ground up, pulling it from the brink of bankruptcy with a loan that nearly broke him, Jaylen was no stranger to hard work. But now, after 2 decades of success, he wanted to see if the promise he'd made, service above all, still stood. The first-class check-in counter was tucked away at the edge of the terminal, quiet and almost serene compared to the chaotic scrum of economy check-ins. Jaylen walked past families bickering over baggage fees, businessmen in rumpled suits, and the occasional child screeching at the top of their lungs. The scene was nothing new for him. He had navigated it all before: boardrooms, private jets, luxury lounges. But today, he was here to witness the other side, the human side, the side that didn't get the platinum treatment or the first-class pass. As he reached the counter, he noticed a woman ahead of him, a tall figure in glossy heels and a cream trench coat. Her hair was pulled tight into a sleek bun, and the air around her seemed to hum with an invisible aura of wealth. She was the perfect customer for Apex Airlines, the kind who expected nothing less than the best. The flight attendant behind the counter, a young blonde woman named Vanessa, was quick to greet the woman with a bright, almost exaggerated smile. Jaylen watched her as she handed over the boarding pass, her fingers delicate and manicured, as though she were presenting something sacred. "Mrs. Langley, enjoy your flight," Vanessa said in a voice that was syrupy sweet, trained to pamper the elite. Jaylen's turn came next. He stepped forward, his broad frame filling the space. He offered a polite smile, his voice warm but steady, carrying just enough authority to make it clear he wasn't here to waste anyone's time. "Good afternoon," he said, his tone calm yet commanding. Vanessa's expression shifted instantly, like someone flipped a switch. The warmth drained from her face, replaced by a thin, tight line of lips and cold, calculating eyes. She didn't acknowledge his greeting, barely even glanced at him, and without missing a beat, she waved him off with a curt, "Economy check-in is over there." The dismissal hit Jaylen like a slap to the face, the old familiar sting creeping under his skin. He'd faced this before, growing up in a city where his mere presence was enough to get doors slammed in his face. But now he wasn't that kid anymore. He was Jaylen Brooks, a self-made billionaire, the man who built Apex Airlines from the ground up. And this wasn't how things were supposed to go. "Excuse me," Jaylen said, his voice a low, controlled growl. "I'm flying first class." His words hung in the air for a brief moment, thick with the weight of unspoken tension. Jaylen handed over his ticket, expecting the routine scan and polite exchange that should follow. Instead, Vanessa's eyes narrowed, skepticism flashing across her face. She snatched the ticket from his hand with a huff, her grip possessive, as though she were handling something beneath her, something unworthy of attention. As she studied the ticket, Jaylen could feel the tension building. The moment stretched out, the noise of the terminal fading into the background. The crowd buzzed around them, but in that small, quiet space between him and Vanessa, there was nothing but the slow burn of her disbelief. Vanessa held the ticket up to the light, squinting at the printed text as if it were some kind of forgery. The corners of her mouth curled into a sneer, a look of pure distaste, as if the ticket itself were an affront to her immaculate world. Jaylen's pulse quickened, but he didn't flinch. He'd been here before, dealing with people who dismissed him based on assumptions, on the way he looked. It was something he'd learned to endure, to push past. But this was different. This wasn't just another random encounter. This was his airline, his rules, and she was about to break them. Without another word, Vanessa gripped the ticket with both hands, tearing it in half with a sharp, deliberate motion. The sound of the paper shredding echoed through the counter, and for a split second, everything in Jaylen's mind went silent. The torn halves fluttered to the counter like discarded scraps. Vanessa casually tossed them into the trash bin beneath her desk, as if she were tossing away a piece of junk mail. Jaylen blinked, the disbelief washing over him. His ticket. The ticket he had printed himself that morning. The one that entitled him to first-class service. The one he held in his hand just moments ago was now a crumpled mess in the trash. "Excuse me," Jaylen said again, his voice low but now laced with steel. He felt the temperature rising in his chest. This wasn't just about a ruined ticket anymore. This was a challenge. A bold, reckless challenge. And he wasn't backing down. Vanessa didn't seem to register the weight of what she had just done. She didn't flinch. She didn't even seem to care. She folded her arms across her chest, her posture now rigid, as though she had already won. "Must be a mistake," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "We don't let economy passengers sneak into first class." The words hit Jaylen like a punch. He'd heard them all his life. Whispers, muttered slurs. The unspoken barrier that said people like him didn't belong in certain spaces. But he wasn't just any passenger. He wasn't just anyone she could dismiss. This was his world, his company, and she had no idea who she was dealing with. His hands clenched at his sides, but his voice remained calm, controlled. "I'm sorry," he said, leaning in slightly, his tone icy. "What did you just do?" Vanessa's smirk widened, but there was no sense of triumph in it. It was hollow, and for the first time, Jaylen saw the cracks in her demeanor. She didn't back off. She didn't even hesitate. Instead, she waved a dismissive hand, signaling to the security personnel across the terminal. "Security," she called out, her voice now sharp and commanding. "We've got a problem here." Jaylen felt the shift in the air. The crowd around them grew heavier, like the terminal itself was holding its breath. Phones began to come out, recording the scene. The tension thickened, and Jaylen knew he was no longer just a passenger. This had become something much bigger. Something that would ripple far beyond this moment, beyond this terminal. The security guards made their way toward them. Two large men in uniforms, their footsteps heavy, their eyes scanning the scene. Jaylen didn't look away. He wasn't afraid. But he knew in that moment that he was about to make a stand. Not just for himself, but for what he had built, for the system he had worked tirelessly to perfect. Vanessa's smug confidence was starting to waver as she realized this wasn't just a simple confrontation. Jaylen was no longer just a man in a hoodie. He was the CEO of Apex Airlines. And this was about to become a viral showdown. He pulled out his phone, tapping it quickly. The Apex Airlines executive app appeared on the screen. His name, his title, his proof. He held it up for the guards to see, the weight of it heavy in his palm. "Check this," he said, his voice cool and unshaken. "You're dealing with the owner of this airline." One of the guards, a wiry guy with a buzz cut, leaned in, reading the screen. For a brief moment, Jaylen thought it might be enough. That the truth, the undeniable truth, would end this here. That it would all be settled in an instant. But then Vanessa scoffed loudly. "Photoshopped," she sneered, rolling her eyes as she pushed past the guard, her posture as dismissive as ever. "It's a fake. I don't have time for this." Jaylen's jaw tightened. The frustration boiled under the surface, but he didn't let it show. Not yet. He knew this battle wasn't over. But it was clear that Vanessa was digging in, and that the system she represented, one of privilege and unchecked power, was about to clash with everything Jaylen had fought to build. Security was now on high alert. The tension between Jaylen and Vanessa had escalated into something far larger than either of them could have anticipated. Jaylen could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, sensing the shift in the air, the way this situation was beginning to spiral out of control. And for a brief moment, He wondered if this was the point of no return. The crowd had grown thick, and the sounds of muttered conversations, phones clicking, and the hum of the intercom filled the space. Jaylen could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. This wasn't just about a torn ticket anymore. This was about power, identity, justice, and whether he would let a woman in a uniform, with no idea who she was really talking to, define the narrative of his life and empire. He wasn't about to let that happen. Not today. Not ever. Jaylen Brooks sat quietly in the back of the sleek black sedan, the city of Chicago sprawling around him as the car weaved through the familiar streets. His mind, however, was miles away from the hustle of the world outside. After the scene at O'Hare, he had done what any CEO would do in his position: retreat to the safety of his own space, to process everything that had just unfolded. The interaction with Vanessa had shaken him more than he cared to admit. But it wasn't the ticket that bothered him. It was the realization of something deeper, a flaw in the system he had built. Jaylen had created Apex Airlines with a singular purpose: to revolutionize air travel by ensuring that every passenger, no matter their background, received the best service possible. He'd clawed his way to the top from nothing. Growing up on the rough south side of Chicago, he'd spent his childhood watching planes roar above his neighborhood, dreaming of a world beyond the crumbling buildings and poverty. He had always imagined himself behind the cockpit, and when he eventually took the helm as CEO of Apex, he vowed to do things differently. He didn't just want to be successful, he wanted to change the game. The events at the airport had sparked something in him that he hadn't expected. A realization that even with all the money, all the power, there were still cracks in his carefully built empire. He hadn't wanted to believe it, but the truth was staring him in the face. No matter how much he'd achieved, no matter how much Apex had grown, the world wasn't done testing him. And that test had just come in the form of an airline employee with a chip on her shoulder and a ticket torn to pieces. Jaylen's phone buzzed on the passenger seat beside him, interrupting his thoughts. He glanced at it, seeing an incoming message from his chief of operations. The message was simple but urgent. "We need to talk. The incident at O'Hare is already trending. This is bigger than we thought." He sighed, his fingers brushing the edge of the phone, but not picking it up immediately. The crowd's reaction, the phones being whipped out to record, the growing public spectacle. He knew this was going to escalate, but what he didn't know was how far it would go, and more importantly, how his empire would weather the storm. His thoughts shifted back to the incident itself. The way Vanessa had treated him, dismissive, condescending. It wasn't the first time he'd faced prejudice, but it was the first time it had happened in a place where he'd built everything from the ground up. That simple act of tearing up his first-class ticket wasn't just about a broken policy or a misunderstanding. It was an assault on everything he had worked for, a reminder that no matter how far he'd come, he would always have to fight for his place in a world that saw him as something less than worthy. But Jaylen wasn't a man to back down. Not now, not ever. He had too much to lose, too much riding on this moment. As much as he had built Apex to be a symbol of inclusivity and service, he knew that some people would never see him as anything more than a black man in a hoodie, a reminder of everything they resented, everything they feared. That truth, painful as it was, had settled into his gut, and now it felt like the weight of the world. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but it was a road he had walked before. He had the power, the resources, and the will to take this fight wherever it needed to go. But that didn't make it any less daunting. "Jaylen," Marcus, his trusted lawyer and confidant, said, breaking the silence. His voice was calm but tinged with concern. "We need to get ahead of this. If it's going viral, it's only a matter of time before this goes from an incident to a full-blown crisis." Jaylen nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. "I know. Let's see what we can do." As the car made its way through the city, Jaylen's thoughts sharpened. He couldn't allow this incident to define him, and he certainly couldn't let it define Apex Airlines. But he knew the only way forward was through the storm. The sedan came to a stop in front of the sleek, glass-fronted office building that housed the Apex Airlines headquarters. Jaylen sat still for a moment, looking out at the city skyline, his mind racing. He knew what he had to do. The viral video of his encounter at O'Hare was already circulating, and the buzz had only grown louder. It wouldn't be long before the media picked up on it. His phone had been blowing up with calls, messages, and news alerts, but he wasn't going to let this moment define him. He had weathered worse storms in his life and had always emerged on top. As Jaylen stepped out of the car and adjusted his hoodie, he felt the weight of everything pressing down on him. This wasn't just about a rude flight attendant. It was about something much bigger. His reputation, the reputation of his company, and the ideals he had spent years building. Apex Airlines wasn't just a business. It was a reflection of everything he stood for. Service above all, fairness, equality. But now someone had tested that, and Jaylen wasn't about to let it slide. He entered the building, his footsteps echoing in the quiet lobby. The staff greeted him with polite nods, but he didn't have time for pleasantries. His mind was already shifting into problem-solving mode. The first step was damage control. He couldn't let this spiral into a full-blown PR disaster. But at the same time, he knew that to fix it, he had to confront the deeper issues head-on. Jaylen took the elevator up to the top floor, where his office awaited. The sleek, modern space was designed to exude power, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the city below. He paused for a moment, letting the quiet stillness of the office settle over him. It was a stark contrast to the chaos of the terminal he had just left behind. Marcus, his lawyer, was already there, waiting for him. "We've got a plan in place," Marcus said, his voice steady and composed, though Jaylen could see the concern behind his eyes. "We'll issue a statement, but we need to be strategic about this. We don't want to fuel the fire." Jaylen nodded. He had known Marcus for years. He trusted him. But even with his lawyer's help, Jaylen knew this wasn't going to be easy. This wasn't a simple PR crisis. It was a fight for everything he had built. The board, the media, and the public, they all had their opinions, and some were already taking sides. "I want to take control of the narrative," Jaylen said, his voice firm. "We need to show them who I am, who Apex is. I've spent my whole life building this empire, and I won't let one person tear it down with a single lie." Marcus didn't flinch. "We'll get ahead of it, but we need to do it carefully. You've got a lot of people watching now. We can't afford to make any mistakes." Jaylen's gaze was fixed on the city below, his mind whirling with ideas, strategies, and potential consequences. He had been underestimated his whole life by people who saw him as nothing more than a black man from the south side of Chicago, with no real place in the world of billionaires and CEOs. But he had proved them all wrong. He had built Apex Airlines from nothing, and no one was going to take that from him. He turned to Marcus, his expression steely. "Let's do this. I'm not backing down." Marcus nodded, already tapping away on his phone, setting things in motion. The fight had just begun, and Jaylen was ready to take it to anyone who stood in his way. The world had underestimated him before, and it would do so again if they weren't careful. But this time, he wasn't just fighting for his company. He was fighting for his name, his legacy, and the future of everyone who believed in what he was building. The battle was on, and Jaylen Brooks wasn't going to lose. Jaylen sat at the sleek, polished conference table in his office, his fingers tapping lightly on the surface as he stared out the window at the city below. The weight of the morning's events still hung heavily on him, and the pressure was mounting with each passing minute. His phone buzzed incessantly on the table, messages, emails, notifications from news outlets all racing to break the story. The viral video of his confrontation with Vanessa at O'Hare was already making rounds, and the buzz had only grown louder. Jaylen had done his best to keep his composure, but this was different. This was personal. He had built Apex Airlines from the ground up, clawing his way from a broken childhood to the heights of a multi-billion-dollar empire. Every decision, every move had been calculated to reflect his vision of a world where people, no matter their background, were treated equally. But today he had been reminded of just how fragile that vision could be. A single encounter, a single moment of disregard, had turned into a social media storm, threatening everything he had worked for. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration beginning to give way to resolve. The meeting with Marcus had done little to calm his nerves. While the lawyer had reassured him that a statement would be issued to control the narrative, Jaylen knew that damage control wasn't enough. This wasn't just about one woman's mistake or one misstep in customer service. This was about a much larger issue, the systemic prejudices that had followed him his whole life. He couldn't let it slide, not when his name, his reputation, and his company were on the line. The video was already out there, showing Vanessa's dismissive attitude, the torn ticket, and the shock of the onlookers as the situation spiraled into chaos. It was clear that many were on his side. On the surface, the crowd had witnessed a wrongful act, and Jaylen's name had been tossed into the public spotlight as a victim of racial bias. But he wasn't just a victim, and he wasn't about to let anyone paint him as one. No, this was a reckoning, a moment to expose the undercurrent of discrimination that ran deep in society, even in the places that should have been safe. Jaylen's reflection was broken by a knock at the door. Without waiting for an invitation, Marcus walked in, his face serious but calm. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. "I've got the footage. It's spreading fast, but we need to make sure we're not reacting impulsively." Jaylen looked up, meeting his lawyer's gaze. "I'm not reacting impulsively, Marcus. I'm fighting for something bigger than just me. Apex is built on equality. If we don't take a stand now, we might as well abandon everything we've worked for." Marcus nodded, a slight frown forming as he stepped closer. "I get it, but we need to be smart about how we handle this. The media's already framing the story. They'll spin it in their own direction if we don't take control." Jaylen rose from his chair, his eyes narrowing with determination. "Then let's take control, but we're doing it my way. I want to address the public. I want to talk about the bigger picture, about the system that's been holding us back." Marcus hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "You sure? It could escalate things even further." "I'm sure," Jaylen said, his voice unwavering. "If we don't speak out now, we'll lose more than just this battle. We'll lose the soul of Apex." With a final nod, Marcus pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly, setting the wheels in motion for the press conference that would take place within the hour. As Jaylen stood there staring out at the city below, he knew one thing for certain. This fight wasn't going to be easy, but it was one he couldn't afford to lose. The truth was on his side, and for the first time, he felt ready to face the storm head-on. As the minutes ticked by, the office buzzed with activity. Marcus was working quickly, coordinating the press conference, making calls to key journalists, and ensuring the message would be delivered in a way that would command attention, but not cause unnecessary escalation. Jaylen paced the room, his thoughts racing as he prepared for what was ahead. He knew that speaking out was the right move, but the weight of his words would carry consequences far beyond just this moment. The press conference would be his chance to take control of the narrative, his chance to speak directly to the public and reclaim the story from the swirling storm of rumors. He wasn't just defending himself. He was defending the core values of his company, the ones he had fought so hard to instill in every aspect of Apex Airlines. Equality, opportunity, a commitment to treating everyone, from the most powerful to the most powerless, with dignity. This wasn't just about Vanessa's actions. It was about the world that created people like her, people who thought they could tear him down without a second thought. As he stood by the window, watching the sun dip behind the city's skyline, Jaylen couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. Growing up in the south side of Chicago, he had been told time and time again that he didn't belong. He had been told that he wasn't capable, that he would never amount to anything more than the neighborhood he came from. And yet, here he was. He had built an empire from nothing, turning Apex into a force to be reckoned with in the airline industry. And now, just because one woman in a uniform had decided to put him in his place, everything he had worked for was suddenly on the line. "Everything you've built, Jaylen," he muttered to himself, "it's not just for you. It's for everyone who believes in the same ideals. Don't let them take that away." A sharp knock on the door pulled him out of his thoughts. It was time. Jaylen straightened up, running a hand through his hair as he made his way to the front of the room. Marcus stood ready, his phone in hand, as the last details fell into place. The small group of media personnel had gathered, and Jaylen could hear the chatter from the hallway. their whispers growing louder as they waited for the moment to arrive. As he walked into the makeshift conference room, the camera snapped into focus. The room went silent. All eyes were on him. He could feel the weight of their scrutiny, the expectation in the air. His heart rate quickened for a split second. But then he remembered why he was here. This wasn't just about answering questions. It was about making a statement. "Good evening," Jaylen began, his voice calm and strong, though it carried the weight of everything he had been holding back. "I'm here today not just as the CEO of Apex Airlines, but as a man who has spent his life fighting for something bigger than myself. Today we stand at a crossroads. The events at O'Hare have sparked a conversation, one that's long overdue." He paused for a moment, letting his words settle in the room. He could see the cameras flashing, the reporters leaning forward, waiting for what he would say next. This isn't just about an isolated incident or an employee who overstepped. This is about the system that continues to let people like Vanessa and many others believe they can treat others as less than because of their skin color, their background, or their status. I have fought my entire life against that system. From the streets of Chicago to the boardrooms of Apex, I have built everything I have on the belief that no one should ever be judged by anything other than their character. He could feel the heat rising in his chest as he spoke, the raw emotion leaking into his words. He wasn't just telling his story. He was demanding that others listen, that they understand the weight of what he was saying. "And I won't let this moment, this lie, define the narrative of who I am and who we are as a company. We are Apex Airlines, and we are built on the foundation of fairness and integrity. We will not back down, and we will not be silenced by ignorance. This is my stand, our stand, against a world that too often allows people like Vanessa to wield their power to make others feel small." Jaylen took a breath, his eyes scanning the room. This was only the beginning. The media, the public, they were watching, waiting to see how he would respond to the firestorm. But Jaylen knew that he had just fired the first shot in a battle that would determine the future of his empire. It wasn't about winning the fight right now. It was about proving that he would never back down. "Thank you," Jaylen finished, his voice steady. "I'll take your questions." As the room erupted into a flurry of questions, Jaylen stood tall, ready to face whatever came next. He wasn't just defending himself, he was starting a movement. The story wasn't over, and he wasn't done fighting. Jaylen sat at his desk, the weight of the last few days pressing down on him. The press conference had barely made a dent in the storm that was brewing. Despite his best efforts to control the narrative, the backlash had only intensified. News outlets were all over the story, and every new headline seemed to add fuel to the fire. Apex Airlines had become the face of public outrage, and Jaylen had become the target of a smear campaign he wasn't prepared for. It wasn't just the media. The social media backlash had been brutal. Videos of his confrontation with Vanessa at O'Hare were being reposted by every account with a grudge to settle. The comments were flooded with everything from praise for Jaylen's composure to vicious attacks questioning his legitimacy, his place in the world of business. The truth was being drowned in the noise, and Jaylen was left wondering how much of it he could endure before it broke him. But there was one thing Jaylen knew for certain. He couldn't let it break him. Not now. Not after everything he had worked for. His phone buzzed, cutting through the haze of his thoughts. It was Marcus, his lawyer, with an update. Jaylen hesitated for a moment before picking it up. "Jaylen, we've got a problem," Marcus said, his voice tight. "Vanessa's lawyer is calling for your resignation. They're threatening to sue for defamation if you don't step down. The public pressure's mounting. The board is already talking about holding an emergency meeting. They want you to consider stepping down to save face." Jaylen's jaw clenched as he processed the words. The board was already questioning him. They were already looking for a way out, as if his name alone wasn't enough to hold the company together. Jaylen had built Apex from nothing. He wasn't about to let it crumble because of a single incident and a smear campaign. "Tell the board I'm not going anywhere," Jaylen said, his voice low and steady. "And make sure they know that anyone who wants to see me gone will have to go through me first." He hung up before Marcus could respond. Jaylen wasn't in the mood for any more negotiations or empty reassurances. The time for talking was over. It was time for action. Jaylen stood up from his desk, pacing the room as he thought through his next move. The pressure was suffocating, but he had been in worse situations. He had fought his entire life for this moment. He wouldn't let it slip away because of someone like Vanessa or anyone else who thought they could take him down. The company needed him now more than ever. Jaylen had always believed that true leadership came from the ability to remain calm in the face of adversity, to rise above the chaos and make decisions with clarity. This was his test. He would not be found wanting. He grabbed his jacket and headed out the door. He wasn't just going to sit back and wait for things to get worse. He would take control of the situation, confront his enemies head on, and prove that no matter how fierce the storm, he would always be the one standing tall when the dust settled. Jaylen stepped into the elevator, the tension in his body barely contained. He could feel his pulse quickening, his mind racing as he thought through his next steps. The time for sitting behind a desk and making calls was over. If he wanted to protect everything he had worked for, he needed to take action. The board might be wavering, but he wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing him back down. He couldn't afford to. As the elevator doors closed, Jaylen's thoughts turned to his employees, the ones who believed in him, who had followed him through thick and thin. He owed them more than a resignation. He owed them a fight. His mind was clear now. He was going to confront this head on, not just for his own sake, but for the people who had built this company with him. The elevator doors opened to the boardroom, and Jaylen walked in, his presence commanding immediate attention. The board members were already seated, their expressions a mixture of concern and uncertainty. They knew the stakes were high, and they had no idea which way Jaylen would lean. They had expected him to cave in, to bow to the pressure. They were wrong. "Good afternoon," Jaylen said, his voice calm but strong. The room fell silent as everyone turned their attention to him. He could see the unease in their eyes, the hesitation in their postures. But none of that mattered. He was here to lead. "We're not backing down," he continued, walking to the head of the table. "Apex Airlines was built on the idea of fairness, of opportunity for everyone. That includes our employees and our customers, but it also includes me. This company is my legacy, and I'm not going to let anyone tear it apart." He could feel the room's collective breath catch. They weren't used to Jaylen being so direct, so unyielding, but he had made up his mind. This wasn't just about one bad incident. This was about protecting the foundation of Apex, the values it represented. "I've worked my whole life to get here," Jaylen went on, his voice steady but filled with intensity. "And I won't let it all slip away because of a few people who think they can push me around. We've built something bigger than that." The board members exchanged glances, and Jaylen could see the wheels turning in their heads. They were starting to understand that he wasn't going to be swayed by the media frenzy or the pressure from Vanessa's camp. This was more than just a business issue. It was personal. "Now I expect full support from all of you," Jaylen said firmly. "If anyone here is unsure about that, we need to discuss it now. But I'm not going to let this company fall into the hands of people who don't have the guts to stand up for what we've built." For a moment, there was silence. Then one by one, the board members began to nod, their uncertainty shifting into something more resolute. They knew Jaylen wasn't going to be easily defeated, and they understood that if they wanted to keep Apex intact, they needed to back him up. "All right, Jaylen," one of the senior board members said, leaning forward. "We'll follow your lead. Let's fight this thing." Jaylen gave a nod of approval, his posture relaxing slightly. It wasn't over yet, but this was a victory in itself. He had the backing of the people who could make or break his company. Now it was time to take the battle to the next stage. As he left the boardroom, Jaylen's mind began to focus on the next move. The media was still out of control, but he knew how to use it. It was time for him to step out again, to show the world that he wasn't just some figurehead, but the man who had built Apex from the ground up. And this time, the world was going to hear him loud and clear. The fight was only just beginning, and he wasn't going down without a fight. Jaylen sat in his car, staring out at the quiet night streets of Chicago, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The meeting with the board had gone as well as it could have, but it wasn't enough to calm the storm brewing within him. They'd backed him for now, but he could feel the cracks starting to form. The pressure was mounting, and he knew it wasn't just about defending his reputation anymore. It was about proving that Apex could survive a crisis like this, that he could hold it all together when everything seemed to be falling apart. The phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his reverie. It was Marcus. Jaylen answered without hesitation. "You're not going to believe this," Marcus said, his voice tight with concern. "I've just received word from the PR team. They've found something big. Vanessa's lawyer is digging into your past and they're trying to paint you as a fraud. It's not just about the ticket anymore. They're taking this to a new level." Jaylen's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his jaw setting. He'd known something like this was coming. His enemies weren't just going to let this go. They wanted to destroy him, to take him down piece by piece. The attack on his character was no longer an isolated incident. It was becoming a full-on assault on everything he had built. "Tell me what they're saying," Jaylen replied, his voice steady but laced with anger. "They're bringing up your history, your background," Marcus continued. "They're digging into the bankruptcy proceedings when you first took over Apex, the loans. They're trying to spin it as if you only got where you are through manipulation and deception. They're even questioning the legitimacy of your rise, making it sound like you were a financial risk from the start." Jaylen exhaled sharply, his thoughts racing. The public had always questioned his legitimacy. The media had painted him as a self-made success story with a chip on his shoulder, a man who defied the odds. But now those odds were coming back to haunt him, and his success was being questioned as if it had never been earned. "What's the plan?" Jaylen asked, his mind already calculating his next move. "We need to get ahead of it. We can't let them control the narrative. I've set up a meeting with your PR team. We'll put together a response, but we'll need you to be upfront. Tell your story, Jaylen. Let the people hear the truth, not the lies." Jaylen stared out at the city lights, his thoughts still churning. It wasn't just about a response. It was about taking control, about proving that his success wasn't a fluke, that his rise from the south side of Chicago to the helm of Apex Airlines was no accident. He had fought tooth and nail to get here, and he wasn't about to let anyone strip that from him. "I'm not hiding," Jaylen said finally, his voice firm. "We're going to own this. I'll talk. I'll tell them everything." Marcus paused for a moment, his voice softer now. "You sure about this, Jaylen? This won't be easy." "I'm sure," Jaylen said, his voice resolute. "I'm done letting them tell my story. It's time I tell it myself." He hung up the phone and sat there in silence for a moment, staring into the city. There was no turning back now. The fight had become bigger than him. It was about the truth, and he was ready to fight for it, no matter the cost. As the car started moving again, Jaylen's mind was already on the next move. The media had only just begun to turn on him, but he wasn't about to let them dictate his future. If anything, this was his chance to rewrite the story. The public was watching, and it was time for him to show them exactly who Jaylen Brooks was. Not just the CEO of Apex Airlines, but the man who had fought for every inch of his success. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but Jaylen was done playing defense. He was about to take the fight to the next level. The following morning, Jaylen walked into the boardroom, feeling the familiar weight of leadership settle over him. The room was filled with the usual suspects, executives, senior staff, and a few key members from his PR team. They were all here for one reason: to strategize the response to the growing storm surrounding Apex Airlines. The air was thick with tension, but Jaylen knew that if he didn't step up and take control now, everything could unravel. He took his seat at the head of the table, glancing around at the faces of the people who had followed him for so many years. There was a look in their eyes. Concern, yes, but also trust. They knew that when Jaylen set his mind to something, he made it happen. Now, more than ever, they needed that confidence to stand firm. "All right, everyone," Jaylen said, his voice cutting through the room. "We all know why we're here. The situation with Vanessa and the media is escalating, and it's not just going to go away. We have to fight this. Fight it with everything we've got." His words were met with a quiet murmur of agreement. The PR team had prepared a rough statement, but Jaylen wasn't interested in half measures. He had to be at the front of this battle, not hiding behind carefully crafted sound bites. He needed to speak directly to the people, show them who he really was, and take ownership of the narrative. One of the senior PR members, Lisa, spoke up. "We've drafted a response, but it's critical that we remain professional. The last thing we want is to stoke the fire with any more controversy." Jaylen nodded but didn't agree with her approach entirely. I hear you, Lisa, but what I don't want is for us to play defense. That's not who we are. We've always been about taking control, showing the world what Apex stands for. If we sit here trying to appease everyone, we'll lose. I'm not here to apologize for being successful, and I'm not going to apologize for building Apex the way I did. The truth is, I fought to get here. I fought for every seat on that plane, for every passenger, for every employee. His gaze swept across the room, making eye contact with each of his team members. This is personal now. The system that's being used to tear me down, our company down, is the same system that keeps people like me from getting a fair shot. We have a chance to take a stand. We need to fight for what's right. Marcus, standing off to the side, stepped forward with a folder in hand. He had been quiet up until this point, but Jaylen could see the calm determination in his lawyer's eyes. Jaylen, I agree with you, but we also need to be prepared for the consequences. The media is already framing this as a racial issue. This could get bigger than just Apex. We have to be careful about what we say and how we say it. Jaylen understood the risk, but he wasn't about to let the narrative be dictated by fear. I know the stakes, Marcus, he said, but if we don't take control now, we'll lose. This isn't just about defending my reputation. It's about showing the world who we really are, about standing up against the forces that want to keep us in the shadows. The room fell into a thoughtful silence. Jaylen could see his team processing the weight of his words. He wasn't just asking them to support him. He was asking them to stand by their values, to fight alongside him for something bigger than just a company. He was asking them to fight for justice. We need to release the statement, Jaylen said, breaking the silence. But we're doing it my way. We're going to be transparent. We're going to address the media directly. I'll take the heat, but we need to show the world the truth. The PR team nodded, understanding the gravity of what he was saying. This wasn't just a statement, it was a call to action. They would release the truth, not just defend against the lies. We'll prepare a live press conference, Lisa suggested, pulling up the notes on her tablet. That way there's no room for distortion. We'll have the opportunity to answer questions in real time and show the world we're not backing down. Jaylen's eyes narrowed, a fierce resolve in his gaze. Exactly. We're not just going to sit here and let this be spun in every direction. It's time to set the record straight, once and for all. The plan was in motion now. The team began working out the final details, but Jaylen knew this was only the beginning. The real fight would be in the court of public opinion, and he was prepared to battle every step of the way. As he left the boardroom later that afternoon, Jaylen felt a strange calm wash over him. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to lose. Apex was his, and he would do whatever it took to protect it. The world would see the truth, and in the end, they would have no choice but to respect the legacy he had built. Jaylen's heart pounded as he stood backstage, waiting for the press conference to begin. The tension in the air was palpable, the silence deafening. He could hear the murmur of reporters outside the door, their voices buzzing with anticipation. The weight of the moment pressed on him, but there was no turning back now. This was the moment he'd been building toward, his chance to set the record straight. The past few days had been a blur of media frenzy and sleepless nights. Vanessa's lawyer had only intensified the attacks, pushing forward with accusations that painted Jaylen as a fraud, a man who had built his empire on lies. The smear campaign had escalated quickly, and now Jaylen's entire future, his legacy, his company, was on the line. He had no choice but to step into the spotlight and face it head-on. As the minutes ticked by, Jaylen adjusted his suit, straightening the cuffs and pulling his tie a bit tighter. His reflection in the mirror showed a man who had been through hell and back, but still stood tall, still carried himself with the confidence he had worked so hard to earn. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about the employees who believed in him, the people who had supported him, and the values that Apex Airlines had been built on. If he didn't speak out now, it would all crumble. The door swung open and Marcus stepped in, his expression as composed as ever. "You ready?" he asked, his voice steady, but with a hint of concern beneath the calm exterior. Jaylen nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yeah, let's do this." Together they walked toward the stage, where a bank of cameras awaited. The bright lights were blinding, But Jaylen didn't flinch. He had faced far worse than this. The crowd hushed as he stepped up to the podium, the spotlight casting a sharp contrast between the darkness of the room and his figure at the center. He looked out over the sea of reporters, his mind racing for a moment, but then he spoke. "Good afternoon. I stand before you today not just as the CEO of Apex Airlines, but as a man who has spent his life fighting for something bigger than myself. The recent events that have unfolded are a direct attack on everything I've worked for, everything that this company stands for." The words flowed with ease, but the emotion behind them was real. This wasn't just a scripted statement, it was a declaration. "I've spent years building this company from the ground up, from a small, struggling airline to a force in the industry. Apex isn't just a business, it's a symbol of what hard work and dedication can achieve. But what you've seen in the media, what you've heard about me, is not the truth. And I'm here today to tell you that." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle in the room. The cameras clicked, the reporters scribbled, and Jaylen could feel the eyes of the world on him. This was his moment to turn the tide, to take control of the narrative. He wasn't just defending his reputation. He was defending the very principles that had guided him all these years. "You see, the story that's been told isn't the whole story," Jaylen continued, his voice unwavering. "The truth is that I've been fighting my entire life, fighting against the odds, fighting against people who said I didn't belong. And I've made it. I built Apex on the foundation of equality, fairness, and opportunity for everyone. That's why this attack on my character, on my success, is so personal." Jaylen's eyes swept over the room. He could see the skepticism in some of their eyes, the doubt in others. But he was ready to confront it all. "I'm not here to apologize for where I came from or for what I've achieved. No one in this room, no one in the media, no one in the world has the right to take that from me. And I won't let anyone tear down the company I've built or the future that we're working toward." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. For a moment, Jaylen allowed himself to stand there, grounded in the truth of what he had said. He wasn't just speaking for himself, he was speaking for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. And that, he realized, was the true power behind his words. He straightened up, ready for the next question. This was only the beginning, but for the first time in days, he felt the smallest flicker of hope. The first question came quickly, the voice of a reporter cutting through the stillness. "Mr. Brooks, given your background and the allegations against you, how do you respond to claims that your success was built on manipulation and risk-taking that put your investors and employees in jeopardy?" Jaylen took a deep breath, refusing to let the question shake him. This wasn't just a defensive question, it was an attack on everything he had built, everything he had fought for. But he wasn't going to back down. "Let me be very clear," Jaylen began, his voice calm but firm. "I didn't take shortcuts to get here. I didn't cut corners. I worked my ass off. I took risks, yes, but those risks were calculated. And those risks paid off, not just for me, but for the thousands of people who work for Apex, for the families who rely on us, and for the customers who trust us every day." He let the words sink in, looking directly at the reporters before him. "I didn't get here by being reckless. I got here by believing in the power of hard work, of smart decisions, and of creating an environment where people can grow and succeed. Those who work at Apex know this, because they live it every day. This isn't just about numbers and spreadsheets. This is about building a company with heart." There was a pause as the room processed his answer. Jaylen could see the flickers of doubt in the eyes of some of the reporters. But it didn't matter. He wasn't here to convince everyone. He was here to speak the truth, to speak for the people who believed in him, who believed in Apex. Another reporter raised their hand, a man with a skeptical look on his face. "But how do you respond to the fact that Apex is facing a growing number of lawsuits and complaints from both customers and employees? What does that say about the environment you've created?" Jaylen felt a flash of anger, but he pushed it down. He knew this was coming. The media loved to focus on the negative, the sensational. But he had learned to stay calm in the face of these kinds of attacks. "What it says is that we're a growing company, and when you grow, you're going to face challenges. But I'll tell you this, We've learned from every single mistake, and we've worked harder to improve. We've put systems in place to ensure better customer service, better training for our employees, and better support across the board. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. I'm proud of what we've accomplished, and I'm proud of the people who make Apex what it is. Yes, we've faced criticism, but we're listening. We're improving. We will continue to evolve and do better every day. That's the promise I made when I started this company, and I'm keeping it. The questions came faster now, each one more pointed than the last, but Jaylen held his ground. He spoke from a place of truth, from the deep conviction that everything he had built was earned and deserved. His words weren't just a defense, they were a declaration. He wasn't a fraud, and he wasn't going to let anyone tell that story. As the press conference continued, Jaylen felt a shift. The reporters, who had initially been skeptical, were beginning to listen more intently, some of them even jotting down notes. He knew he had their attention, and he was determined to keep it. The final question came, a woman in the back of the room. Mr. Brooks, what do you say to those who believe that your rise to power and the wealth you've accumulated has come at the expense of others? Is there a price for success? Jaylen paused, the weight of the question settling into his chest. This was the question he had been expecting, the one that would truly test him. He knew that there were people who believed his success was somehow unfair, that he had taken something from others to get ahead. But he wasn't about to apologize for his hard work. I'll say this, he started slowly, his voice firm. Success doesn't come without sacrifice. I've sacrificed a lot to get here, and I've given everything I have to build this company. But I didn't do it by stepping on others. I did it by lifting people up, by creating opportunities for those who didn't have them. Apex is a reflection of my values, hard work, integrity, and a commitment to making the world a better place. If there's a price for success, then it's the price of persistence, of grit, and of believing in something bigger than yourself. He let those words hang in the air, and for the first time in hours he felt a sense of relief. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot, but he had said what needed to be said. The media might continue to attack, but they wouldn't be able to take his truth away. As the press conference wrapped up and the reporters filed out, Jaylen stood at the podium, his heart still racing, but his mind clear. He had faced the storm head-on, and while the fight was far from over, he had taken the first crucial step in reclaiming his narrative. He was ready for whatever came next. Jaylen walked out of the press conference feeling the weight of the world still hanging over him. The room was buzzing with the aftermath of his words, reporters scrambling to file their stories, but Jaylen was no longer focused on them. His mind was on the battle ahead. He had faced the media head-on, but this fight was far from over. The world now knew his side of the story, but the backlash was only intensifying. The press, the public, everyone was watching, waiting for the next move. Vanessa's lawyer was relentless, pushing forward with more accusations, twisting every angle to make Jaylen look like the villain in this narrative. The stakes were rising, and Jaylen knew he had to outsmart them at every turn. He made his way back to his office, his steps quick, determined. The hallway was quiet now, the noise of the press conference still echoing in his ears. He needed a moment to collect himself, but there was no time for that. Marcus was already waiting for him, standing by the door, a look of concern in his eyes. You did well in there, Marcus said, his voice low, but we're not out of the woods yet. Jaylen nodded, feeling the truth in his words. I know, but we've started something. We've given the public the truth, and now we have to make sure they hear it, loud and clear. He sat down at his desk, the weight of the situation still pressing on him. He couldn't afford to let his guard down, not with everything on the line. Apex, his legacy, was at stake. His phone buzzed again, a new message flashing on the screen. Another update from his PR team, no doubt. He opened it, his brow furrowing as he read the message. They've escalated, Jaylen muttered under his breath. Vanessa's lawyer is pushing forward with the lawsuit. They're threatening to sue for defamation, and now they're calling for a boycott of Apex Airlines. Marcus stepped closer, the tension in his posture unmistakable. This is exactly what we were worried about. The public outcry is only going to grow. The pressure on you, on the company, is going to keep building. Jaylen closed his eyes for a moment, gathering his thoughts. He had known this was coming. This was the point where the real test began. He wasn't just fighting to defend his company now. He was fighting to prove that Apex stood for something bigger than just business. It was about justice, about the principles he had fought for his entire life. "We have to turn this around," Jaylen said, his voice sharp. "We're not going to sit back and let them control the narrative. I want to meet with the board again. We need to prepare for the next phase." Marcus raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback. "You're already planning your next move? You're not going to wait and see how this plays out first?" "No," Jaylen said firmly. "We need to strike back. We need to be proactive, not reactive. We can't just defend ourselves. We need to go on the offensive. Let's meet with the board and figure out how we can show the public who we really are." Marcus nodded, recognizing the resolve in Jaylen's eyes. "I'll set it up, but this won't be easy. We'll need a strategy that's bigger than just a press release. We need to counterattack, but we have to be smart about it." Jaylen looked out the window, his mind already working through the next steps. The fight had just begun, but he wasn't afraid. He'd spent his whole life fighting for his place in a world that constantly told him he didn't belong. And now, more than ever, he was going to prove that he was worthy of everything he had built. "We're going to do this right," Jaylen said, his voice steady with purpose. "And when we're done, the world will see the truth. Apex will stand strong, and we'll come out of this stronger than ever." As he stood up, ready to take on the next phase of the battle, he knew that the hardest part was yet to come. The world was watching, and Jaylen was more determined than ever to make sure that the fight for Apex's future was one he wouldn't just survive, but win. The boardroom was filled with the usual tension, but today it was heavier than ever. Jaylen stood at the front, his hands resting on the polished wood of the conference table. The board members were gathered around, their faces a mix of concern, skepticism, and curiosity. They had been briefed on the situation, but now Jaylen needed to present the plan, the one that would turn this crisis into an opportunity for Apex to rise above it all. Marcus stood off to the side, his arms crossed, observing the room. He had been helping Jaylen prepare for this meeting, but he knew the real work was in Jaylen's hands now. If anyone could pull this off, it was Jaylen, but the pressure was immense. It was a delicate balance between responding to the media and the public and ensuring that Apex didn't lose its momentum. "Thank you for being here," Jaylen began, his voice cutting through the silence. "I know the situation is dire, but I want to make it clear. Apex is not backing down." There was a slight murmur around the room, and Jaylen could see that the board members were listening closely. They had to be convinced, or the cracks in Apex foundation would deepen, and the company would face something much worse than a public relations issue. "We've been through a lot together, as a company and as a team," Jaylen continued. "And this moment right now? This is our chance to show the world who we really are, to take control of the narrative and turn this into something that will not just save Apex, but make it stronger than ever." He paused for effect, letting his words settle. The room was tense, but Jaylen could feel the eyes of the board members on him, waiting for his next move. "We're going to launch a nationwide campaign, not just a PR blitz. We're going to show people what Apex stands for: service, fairness, and the commitment to our employees and customers. But it's more than that. We're going to start a foundation for diversity and inclusion in the airline industry. We're going to partner with other companies and create a space for underserved communities to have access to real opportunities in aviation." He could see a few members raising their eyebrows at the idea, but Jaylen wasn't deterred. This wasn't just about a slick PR campaign. It was about making a real impact. "The media will be all over us for the next few weeks, trying to spin every angle. But if we use this moment to make a real change, to lead the conversation about equality, we won't just survive, we'll thrive. We'll show the world that we're not just another corporation in the game, we're Apex, and we fight for everyone who's been told they don't belong." The silence that followed was heavier than anything he had expected, but Jaylen stood his ground. He wasn't going to beg for their approval. He was leading them to where the company needed to go, whether they liked it or not. The plan was bold, yes, but it was the only path forward. Finally, one of the board members, Claire, leaned forward in her chair. "This is a big risk, Jaylen. A foundation? A nationwide campaign? It's going to take millions of dollars, and it's going to take time. The pressure is already mounting. Are we really prepared to commit everything to this? Jaylen met her gaze, unwavering. We have no choice, Claire. We're at a crossroads. If we don't act now, the media, the public, they'll control the narrative. If we're serious about leading this company into the future, we need to show people that Apex is about more than just flying them from point A to point B. It's about changing the game. There was another long pause. Jaylen could feel the weight of their judgment, but he stood tall. He was prepared for this. It wasn't about how hard he fought for his company. It was about how hard he fought for the values that Apex represented. And in that moment, he knew it wasn't just about winning the battle. It was about winning the war for what was right. One by one, the board members nodded in agreement, and Jaylen could see their skepticism start to shift toward cautious optimism. This was going to be a long, hard fight, but for the first time in days, Jaylen felt like they were on the right path. He had a plan, a vision for the future of Apex, and he wasn't going to let anyone tear it down. This is our moment, Jaylen said firmly, his voice carrying the full weight of his resolve. We take control of the narrative, or we let the world dictate who we are. We're not letting them do that. Not now. Not ever. And with that, the boardroom was no longer filled with doubt. It was filled with a sense of purpose. Jaylen knew this was only the beginning, but it was a beginning he could fight for. Jaylen stood at the edge of the rooftop, staring out over the city as the evening sun dipped below the horizon. The skyline of Chicago stretched before him, his city, his home, and the birthplace of everything he had built. As he watched the last rays of sunlight reflect off the glass towers, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the battle he was in. The press conference had been a step in the right direction, but the real work was just beginning. In the days following his speech, the backlash hadn't let up. The media was still relentless, and the lawsuits kept coming. Vanessa's lawyer wasn't backing down, and the public's perception of Jaylen was still in flux. For every supporter who rallied behind him, there seemed to be 10 who were eager to tear him down. But Jaylen wasn't backing down either. He couldn't afford to, not when everything he'd fought for was at risk. He had made the decision to take a bold step forward, something bigger than just a damage control campaign. He wasn't going to let the world continue to dictate the terms of his success. He would create the narrative. He would lead the charge for change in the industry he had fought to dominate. It wasn't just about protecting Apex anymore. It was about reshaping the entire conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion within aviation. And that mission was going to start with the foundation he was launching. Jaylen? Marcus's voice broke through the quiet as he stepped up behind him, his figure silhouetted against the fading light. The board's ready to go over the final details of the foundation launch. The press wants a statement soon, but we need to make sure we're clear on the messaging. This isn't just a PR move. This has to be real. Jaylen turned to face his lawyer, the weight of his words sinking in. I know, Marcus. This has to be more than just a headline. It has to be real, or it won't mean anything. Marcus nodded, stepping closer. Exactly. But we also need to be ready for the blowback. The Foundation's mission is a noble one, but there are people out there who'll see it as an attempt to deflect attention. We need to be prepared to fight for it, just like we're fighting for you. Jaylen met Marcus's gaze, his expression steady but resolute. They're already calling me a fraud. Let them try to tear this down too. I'll fight for this just as hard as I fought for Apex. The plan was set, but the risks were undeniable. This foundation wasn't just about writing a check and getting good press. Jaylen knew it would take more than money to make a difference. It would take time, dedication, and a clear vision for how they could actually impact the future of the industry. He was determined to make it happen, but he needed every bit of support from his team, and he wasn't going to let anyone back out of this fight no matter what. As the last of the light faded from the sky, Jaylen felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about turning the tide in his favor. It was about proving to the world that Apex, and he, stood for something bigger than just business. It was about showing that, even in the face of adversity, change could happen. It had to. Let's make it happen, Jaylen said quietly, determination in his voice. Let's show the world what we're capable of. The foundation was more than just a project now. It was the next phase in the war for Apex's survival, and Jaylen was ready for it. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, strategy sessions, and press inquiries. Jaylen had made his decision clear. There was no backing down now. The foundation for diversity and inclusion in the airline industry was in the works, and he would see it through no matter what. The press had seized on the idea, some celebrating the initiative as a groundbreaking step toward progress, while others were quick to label it a distraction from the real issue. It didn't matter. Jaylen knew the truth. He and Marcus had finalized the details. The foundation would offer scholarships to underrepresented communities, creating a pipeline of future aviation professionals. It would partner with schools and flight academies, providing access to resources and opportunities that had long been out of reach for many. Apex would fund the initiative, but it would be a separate entity with its own governance. Jaylen wanted it to stand on its own, to be a symbol of what could be done when businesses committed to real, meaningful change. But the road ahead was still fraught with challenges. The backlash from the press, fueled by Vanessa's lawyer, wasn't going to subside anytime soon. If anything, it had only intensified after the press conference. Some of the most prominent voices in the media were already questioning the sincerity of the foundation, accusing Jaylen of using it as a PR stunt. As the foundation's official announcement drew closer, Jaylen found himself spending more time in strategy meetings, working with his PR team to manage the messaging. The narrative had shifted slightly, but it was far from where he wanted it to be. Despite the good press around the foundation, many still saw him as a divisive figure, and his name continued to be dragged through the mud. One evening, after a particularly taxing meeting with the board, Jaylen stood in front of his office window overlooking the city. He stared out at the lights below, each one representing another person, another life in the vast expanse of the world. The enormity of the situation was overwhelming. His company, his reputation, and his vision for the future were all tied up in this one moment. "Sometimes it feels like you're fighting a battle on all fronts," Marcus said from the doorway, interrupting Jaylen's thoughts. Jaylen turned to face him, nodding. "I've been fighting my whole life. But this is different. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about everything we've worked for, everything Apex stands for. And I'm not going to let anyone take that away." Marcus walked over, his tone serious. "I know, and you're right to feel that way. But you need to understand something. This battle is bigger than the press, bigger than Vanessa. This is about making sure your message doesn't get lost in the noise. We need to stay focused." Jaylen looked at Marcus, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on him. "I don't have the luxury of staying quiet. I've spent too long watching people like me get ignored, dismissed, pushed aside. The moment I step back now, it's over." "I know," Marcus replied, "but be strategic. The public will only follow a leader who remains steady. They want to see you fighting, yes, but they also need to see you focused on the bigger picture. Don't let the noise drown out your message." Jaylen stood silently for a moment, absorbing Marcus's words. The battle was far from over, and the fight to protect Apex, his legacy, and the values it represented had only just begun. But Marcus was right. He couldn't let the noise distract him. He had to stay the course. His vision for Apex and for the future of the airline industry was too important to lose. "Let's focus," Jaylen said, determination returning to his voice. "We make this foundation a success, and we turn the conversation around, not just for me, but for everyone who believes in this fight." With that, Jaylen and Marcus returned to the plan, knowing full well that what was at stake was not just a company, but a movement. And Jaylen wasn't going to let anything or anyone stop him from seeing it through. The days leading up to the foundation's launch were a blur of preparation, tension, and restless nights. Jaylen had thrown himself into the work, but with each passing day, the weight of everything he was juggling seemed to grow heavier. The public's opinion was still divided, but he could see small sparks of change in the air, an increase in support, whispers of admiration, and even a few voices in the media calling his efforts the start of something bigger. But he couldn't afford to rest on those fleeting victories. The foundation was just the beginning. Jaylen had learned early in life that nothing worth having came easy, and now it was no different. As the launch event drew closer, he knew the world was watching, waiting for any sign of weakness, any slip-up that could turn the tide in favor of his enemies. All eyes are on you, Jaylen, Marcus had said to him the night before the launch, the tension in his voice thick. We've got the foundation set, but they're not going to let up. Vanessa's lawyer is still pushing hard, and there are whispers about an even bigger campaign against you. Jaylen had nodded, not needing to hear it again. He had known from the start that this wouldn't be a simple fix. It wasn't just about winning the PR battle. It was about proving something much bigger, not just for himself, but for everyone who had supported him through the years. The foundation was his statement, his declaration that there was more to his success than just wealth or power. Now, as the day of the launch finally arrived, Jaylen found himself standing in front of the massive glass windows of his office, overlooking the city. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows over the streets below. For a moment, he let himself breathe, allowing the calm to wash over him before the storm. This is it, he whispered to himself, feeling the rush of adrenaline pulse through his veins. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was one of his assistants holding a tablet in her hands. Mr. Brooks, the press conference is ready, the cameras are set up, and the guests are arriving. Jaylen nodded, giving her a brief smile. Thanks, I'll be down in a minute. He turned back to the window, his reflection staring back at him. There were so many things on the line today, not just the foundation's success, but his very future. He was about to make a stand, and whether he succeeded or failed, there was no turning back. The world was waiting to see if he was the man he said he was, or if he was nothing more than the product of a media machine he couldn't control. Jaylen took a deep breath, turned on his heel and walked toward the elevator. He was ready. The elevator doors closed behind Jaylen, and the steady hum of the ride down did little to calm the storm swirling in his chest. His mind raced with all the potential outcomes of today's event. This press conference, the official launch of the foundation, was his chance to shape the future of Apex, and his own. He had already laid the groundwork, but now it was time for the world to see the man behind the company, behind the foundation, behind the fight. As the elevator dinged, signaling the arrival at the conference floor, Jaylen's nerves tightened, but he maintained his composure. The doors slid open, revealing the bustling scene outside. Dozens of cameras, reporters jockeying for positions, and his team making final preparations. The buzz of conversation filled the air, but there was a strange, almost electric stillness inside him. He'd done everything he could to prepare for this moment. The launch wasn't just about the foundation. It was about him standing firm in the face of everything that had been thrown at him. Marcus was there, his presence steady as ever, waiting for him by the front of the stage. The two exchanged a brief look, a silent exchange of understanding. No more words were needed. The time for talking was over. It was time to act. Jaylen stepped up to the podium, feeling the full weight of the cameras on him. The sea of reporters turned to face him, their eyes sharp, waiting for the first sign of weakness, the smallest slip-up that could make or break this event. He didn't flinch. He had trained for this. He had lived for this. The room went silent, all attention focused solely on him. Thank you all for being here today, Jaylen began, his voice steady but firm, carrying with it the confidence of someone who had fought through years of adversity to stand where he was now. Today marks a new chapter, not just for Apex Airlines, but for the industry as a whole. For too long, aviation has been an industry that hasn't fully embraced the diversity, inclusion, and opportunity that it could. That changes today. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. His eyes swept across the room, meeting the gaze of reporters, colleagues, and even a few critics in the back. They were all listening. And for the first time in what felt like ages, Jaylen felt in control. We are launching the Apex Foundation for Diversity and Inclusion today, a foundation dedicated to creating a real impact on the future of this industry. It will provide scholarships, mentorship programs, and opportunities for people who have been overlooked for too long. It's time to give those who've been denied the chance the resources they deserve. This isn't just a charity, it's an investment in the future. It's a commitment to ensuring that the airline industry and Apex lead the way in providing opportunities for everyone. As Jaylen spoke, the crowd remained silent, listening intently. His words felt strong, filled with the kind of conviction that could move mountains. This wasn't just about his company. It wasn't even just about the fight for his own future. This was about something bigger. It was about fighting the system, the biases that had kept people like him, people who looked like him, on the outside, just out of reach of true opportunity. This foundation is my promise. It's a promise to every person who has ever been told they can't achieve their dreams because of their background, their race, their gender. Jaylen continued, his voice rising with emotion. We've all been through struggles in our lives. I fought my whole career to build something meaningful, something that could make a difference. Now it's time to give back. Now it's time to make sure others have the same chance to succeed. A murmur rippled through the room as Jaylen's words landed. He could feel the shift in the air. The reporters who had come in skeptical, expecting a soundbite, were now listening intently. Jaylen wasn't just speaking about a company. He was speaking about real change, about challenging the status quo. And they knew it. I'm not here to apologize for my success, Jaylen concluded, his voice calm but resolute. I'm here to show that success can be built on principles of fairness, equality, and opportunity for all. The future of this industry depends on it. Apex is proud to lead that charge. The room remained quiet for a beat before the questions began. The reporters were hungry for more, eager to dissect every word he'd just spoken. But for Jaylen, the launch was just the first step. The hard work was yet to come. He had put himself and his company on the line, and now it was up to the world to see if his actions could truly match the promises he had made today. But as the questions flew at him, Jaylen stood tall, his mind sharp. He had fought to be here, and he was ready for whatever came next. The days following the launch of the Apex Foundation were a whirlwind. The media attention, while not unexpected, came with its own set of challenges. Jaylen knew that even with the press conference behind him, the real work had only just begun. He had put his reputation on the line, and now it was up to the world to decide whether his promises would be enough to shift the conversation, or if they would see it as another corporate gimmick. For the first time in a long while, Jaylen found himself exhausted, his days blurring together as meetings, phone calls, and constant updates filled every waking hour. The foundation was gaining traction, but the scrutiny was relentless. Critics continued to question the sincerity of his actions, dismissing his foundation as a well-crafted distraction from the real issues at Apex Airlines. They were quick to point out the growing list of lawsuits against the company and the ongoing battle with Vanessa's lawyer, who refused to back down. But Jaylen wasn't ready to give up. He knew how to handle pressure. His entire career had been built on overcoming obstacles, on pushing past the doubters and the naysayers. The foundation was his way of showing that he was more than just a businessman who had risen to the top. He was a man committed to changing the system, to making a difference where it mattered most. He wouldn't let anyone take that from him. The phone buzzed on his desk, interrupting his thoughts. It was Marcus. "You need to hear this," Marcus said, his tone urgent. "The board is getting nervous. There's talk of them pulling back support for the foundation if this continues to drag down the company. They're saying the media backlash is too much for them to handle." Jaylen clenched his jaw, feeling the weight of the words. He had known this was coming, but hearing it aloud made it all the more real. "I'm not backing down, Marcus," he said, his voice firm. "The foundation is bigger than the press. It's bigger than any lawsuit or attack. We're not folding. Not now." Marcus was silent for a moment before responding. "I agree with you, but we need a plan. The media isn't letting up, and the foundation's credibility is on the line." "I've already got a plan," Jaylen replied, his eyes narrowing with determination. "We need to show the world that we're taking real action, that this isn't just a PR move. I'm going to speak directly to the public again. But this time, it's not just about me. It's about the future we're building, together." Jaylen hung up, his mind already spinning. The idea of another public address was daunting, but he knew it was necessary. He needed to remind people why he had started this journey in the first place. He needed to remind them of the core values that Apex and the foundation were built on: equity, fairness, and the commitment to creating a level playing field for everyone. Jaylen stood up from his desk, walking over to the window. Chicago stretched before him, a city of possibilities and contradictions, where the struggle for success was as real as the skyline that loomed overhead. He had built Apex from the ground up. Now he was about to take it to new heights. He picked up his phone and started dialing. He wasn't waiting for permission. He was taking control. It was time to fight back in the only way he knew how. Head on, unapologetically, and with everything he had. Jaylen stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie and taking one last deep breath before heading out to the stage. The press conference was scheduled for the afternoon, and the buzz of anticipation was palpable. This time, there would be no scripted speech, no carefully worded responses. This time, he was going to speak from the heart. He had to. The foundation was his lifeline, his chance to show the world that Apex wasn't just about profits. It was about doing what was right, even when it wasn't easy. He had spent the morning reviewing every word he planned to say. He couldn't afford to misstep. Not now. Vanessa's lawyer was still making waves, and the pressure from the board was mounting. They wanted results, and they wanted them fast. The foundation was Jaylen's vision, but he knew that if it didn't prove successful, if it didn't become the game changer he envisioned, everything he had worked for could come crashing down. As he stepped into the elevator and made his way down to the conference hall, his mind replayed the conversations with Marcus. They had discussed the risks in depth, how the foundation could either solidify Jaylen's legacy or be seen as a desperate attempt to cover up deeper issues within Apex. Marcus had made it clear. The next few weeks would determine everything. Jaylen needed to go beyond defending his company and step into the role of a leader who truly understood the magnitude of the moment. When the elevator doors opened, Jaylen was greeted by a familiar face, his PR head, Lisa, who had been tirelessly working behind the scenes. Her expression was serious, but there was an understanding between them. She knew how much this meant to him, and she knew what was at stake. "Ready?" Lisa asked, her voice low but steady. "As ready as I'll ever be," Jaylen replied, his eyes locking with hers. There was no room for doubt, no time for second-guessing. He had come too far to turn back now. The conference hall was filled with reporters, camera crews, and staff. The stage was set, the podium ready, and the chairs neatly arranged for the press. Jaylen took his position at the center of the stage, his hands resting on the podium as he scanned the crowd before him. The weight of the moment was undeniable, but there was also a fire inside him, a fire that wouldn't let him back down. When the murmurs died down, Jaylen took the microphone in his hand and looked directly at the sea of reporters. He felt the familiar tension in the air, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was determination. "Good afternoon," Jaylen began, his voice carrying through the room. "I'm here today not just as the CEO of Apex Airlines, but as someone who believes in the power of change. The foundation we've launched is just the beginning of a long journey, one that's rooted in fairness, opportunity, and a commitment to ensuring that every person, regardless of their background, has the chance to succeed in this industry. This is about breaking barriers. This is about giving people who've been told no a chance to say yes." Jaylen paused, letting the words settle in the air. He could feel the eyes of the room on him, waiting for him to falter, to make a mistake. But he wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. "Now, I know there are those who will question the timing of this initiative. I know there are some who will label it as a diversion, a PR stunt, and that's fine. They can question it, they can criticize it, but the truth is we are doing this because it's the right thing to do. We're doing this because it's time for change, not just for Apex, but for the entire industry." He could hear the soft scribbling of pens in the background, the reporters taking note. Jaylen continued, his voice growing more confident with each passing word. "Apex has always been about more than just business. When I started this company, I didn't just want to build an airline. I wanted to build something that would outlast me, something that would set the standard for what a company could be, both in its operations and its impact on the world. The foundation is part of that vision. It's our commitment to making sure that the future of aviation is open to everyone, no matter where they come from or what they look like." The room was quiet now, the reporters hanging on every word. Jaylen felt the shift. He was no longer just talking about a company. He was talking about a movement for equity, for change, for opportunity, and with every word he knew he was reaching them. "I won't pretend that this foundation will solve all the problems in the world or that it will fix everything overnight. But it's a start, and that's what matters. It's time for Apex to lead the way, not just in innovation, but in creating a future that's fair and just for everyone who's ever been overlooked. He took a deep breath and set the microphone down, ready for the questions to come. The press had been relentless, but Jaylen wasn't afraid anymore. This was his time. He had put everything on the line, and now it was up to the world to decide whether they were ready to see him as the man he knew he was. The man who had built something real, something lasting. The reporters began to raise their hands, eager to question him, but Jaylen stood tall, his resolve firm. This was only the beginning. The real battle had just begun, and he was more ready than ever to fight for what he believed in. The following weeks after the Foundation's launch felt like a series of battles won and lost. Jaylen had expected the scrutiny to be relentless, but it still stung when every move he made was dissected and critiqued. The press, while initially intrigued by the Foundation, had quickly moved on to other stories. The media's fickle nature had never been more apparent, and despite his efforts to keep the Foundation in the spotlight, the backlash against Apex and the growing lawsuits were dominating the headlines. One morning, as Jaylen sat in his office, reviewing the latest media reports, Marcus entered with a heavy look on his face. "Jaylen, we need to talk," he said, his voice low. Jaylen looked up from the screen, his brow furrowing. "What's going on?" Marcus didn't waste any time. "The board is getting nervous. There's increasing pressure to either settle the lawsuits or worse, consider restructuring. The public response to the Foundation is mixed, and some of the investors are concerned it's not enough to change the narrative. The backlash is hurting us, not helping us." Jaylen's pulse quickened. He knew the pressure from the board was coming, but hearing it from Marcus made it feel real. "I knew this wasn't going to be easy," Jaylen said, leaning back in his chair, his hands clenched into fists. "But I can't back down now. The Foundation is our future, Marcus. It's not just a Band-Aid fix. It's about showing that we stand for something more." Marcus nodded, but there was a look of concern in his eyes. "I know, and I agree with you, but there's talk of a major restructuring at the top, a shift that might change how Apex is run. Some of the board members are pushing for a more traditional approach, stepping back from all of this social change talk and focusing on the bottom line." Jaylen felt a surge of frustration. The Foundation, his vision, was being treated like a distraction. It was exactly what he feared when the board had agreed to support it in the first place. Some saw it as an attempt to deflect, while others simply didn't believe it would have a meaningful impact on Apex's future. But for Jaylen, it was everything. "If they want to go back to the old ways, let them," Jaylen said, his voice firm. "But they'll have to do it without me. I'm not backing down. I'm not here to make easy decisions. I'm here to do what's right." Marcus looked at him for a moment, then sighed. "What's the next step then? How do we get this narrative back in our favor?" Jaylen didn't hesitate. "I'll take this to the people again. If the media won't cover it the right way, I'll make them listen. We need a public rally, not just for the Foundation, but to show that Apex isn't afraid of doing things differently. We're going to take this fight directly to the people who are questioning us, show them who we really are and why we're here to stay." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "A public rally? You're going to go to the people directly? That's a huge move. It's risky." Jaylen stood up, his eyes sharp with resolve. "Sometimes the only way to prove your point is to show the world you believe in it, enough to put everything on the line. We need to take control of this. It's time to turn the tide." The idea of holding a rally was unprecedented for Apex. It wasn't the kind of company that typically engaged in public demonstrations or direct activism, but Jaylen understood that this was the moment that would define everything. It wasn't just about the Foundation. It was about showing the world that Apex wasn't just a company. It was a force for change. "All right, let's get to work," Marcus said after a pause, his voice laced with determination. "We'll need to organize quickly, and it won't be easy, but I trust you on this one." Jaylen nodded. "We do it right. We do it loud. Let's show them what Apex stands for." And so, as the pressure from the board grew and the public narrative hung in the balance, Jaylen knew he had to fight harder than ever before. The stakes were higher now, and the risk greater, but Jaylen was no stranger to adversity. This was his moment to push the company and himself into the next phase of the battle for Apex's soul. The rally came together faster than anyone expected. In just a few days, Jaylen had mobilized his team, contacting community leaders, influencers, and his most loyal supporters to join him in taking a stand. The message was clear. Apex was more than just an airline. It was a symbol of change, and it was time to take that message directly to the people. The venue was set in downtown Chicago, a large outdoor space surrounded by tall buildings, where the skyline seemed to loom as both a promise and a challenge. The space was perfect, symbolizing not just Apex's roots in the city, but its future, bold, visible, and impossible to ignore. Jaylen knew the risks. The crowd could either rally behind him or turn against him, but the energy in the air felt different. This wasn't just a rally for an airline, it was a movement. The day of the rally, the streets were lined with people. The media had already begun to gather, cameras set up to capture whatever drama would unfold. The stage was set, and Jaylen stood backstage for a moment, taking in the scene. The crowd was much larger than he had anticipated. People from all walks of life had come to show their support, waving signs and wearing Apex t-shirts. There was a sense of unity in the air, something Jaylen hadn't felt in a long time. "Are you ready for this?" Marcus asked, stepping up to Jaylen, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a slight edge of anticipation. Jaylen nodded, the weight of the moment settling into his chest. "I don't have a choice. We do this right or we lose everything." As Jaylen walked onto the stage, the crowd erupted into applause, the sound deafening, filling the space with energy. For a brief moment, Jaylen allowed himself to feel the rush. He could hear people shouting his name, cheering, and showing their support. It was a sight he'd never imagined. People standing together for something bigger than just a business or a foundation. They were standing for justice, for equality, for change. He stepped up to the podium, his gaze sweeping over the crowd before he began speaking. "Thank you all for being here. Thank you for showing up, not just for me, but for the future we're building together. This rally isn't just about Apex. It's about all of us. It's about creating a world where everyone has a chance to succeed. A world where your skin color, your gender, or where you come from doesn't decide your future." The crowd fell into an attentive silence, hanging on every word. Jaylen continued, his voice strong and unwavering. "We've been told time and time again that change takes time, that it's impossible to challenge the systems that have kept people down for centuries. Well, I'm here to tell you that it's not impossible. I'm here to tell you that we are the change. We are the future." His words hung in the air, and for a moment it felt as though time itself had slowed. Jaylen knew the significance of this moment, not just for him, but for everyone who had gathered. They weren't just listening to a CEO, they were hearing a call to action, a movement that was just beginning. "We're not going to stop here," Jaylen continued. "The Apex Foundation isn't just a response to critics, it's a commitment to a future where people like you, people like me, don't have to fight to be seen, to be heard, or to be given a chance." As he spoke, Jaylen saw the crowd react, people nodding, clapping, and raising their hands in solidarity. The momentum was building, and it felt like the energy in the space was tangible, charging through the air. The press had been skeptical, but as the rally continued, Jaylen could see the shift. The journalists, who had once dismissed him as just another CEO with a cause, were now capturing the moment. This wasn't just a speech, it was a movement. "We're going to keep fighting. We're going to keep pushing. And together we're going to make sure that every person who has been told they don't belong has the chance to prove that they do." The crowd erupted into cheers, and for the first time in weeks, Jaylen felt something he hadn't in a long time. Hope. They were behind him. This wasn't just about Apex Airlines. This was about the fight for justice, for opportunity, and for change. And in that moment, Jaylen knew they had only just begun to make their mark. The rally was only the beginning. The foundation, the press, and the board might still have their doubts, but Jaylen was done being patient. He wasn't waiting for permission to change the world. He was going to make it happen, with the people who had always believed in him by his side. And with that, the real fight was about to begin. The city of Chicago was buzzing with an energy Jaylen hadn't felt in a long time. The rally had done more than just rally the people. It had ignited something inside him, a fire he hadn't realized he still had. The weeks of relentless pressure, the endless questioning, the growing distance between him and some of the board members, all of that seemed to fade into the background as the foundation continued to gain momentum. Jaylen felt the tide beginning to turn, but he knew better than to let his guard down. This was just the beginning of a much bigger journey. At the office, the team was working overtime, managing the flood of new supporters, investors, and inquiries. The foundation had garnered support from major figures in the industry, as well as from some unlikely allies. But for Jaylen, the real victory was seeing people from all walks of life rally behind the cause. People who were tired of the status quo, tired of the way things had always been. Yet even as his spirits lifted, the board was growing increasingly uneasy. There had been quiet murmurs about the direction of the company. Some were still holding on to the traditional, profit-first approach, questioning whether Jaylen's vision of a socially responsible company was sustainable. The foundation had gained attention, but at what cost to the business? The growing number of lawsuits, the controversy surrounding Vanessa's accusations, and the media's fixation on every move he made. It was all starting to wear thin on those who only cared about one thing, the bottom line. Jaylen couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. Despite the progress, he knew there was no easy way out. The board's pressure wasn't going to ease up. He had already made it clear that his commitment to the foundation was unwavering. But what about Apex? What if his vision for the future of the company clashed with the very people who had the power to pull the strings behind the scenes? As he sat in his office late one night, the city lights casting long shadows on the walls, Jaylen realized something. He wasn't just fighting for the future of Apex Airlines. He was fighting for something much bigger, a future where business could mean more than just profit. He wanted to create a legacy that stood for something, that people could look at and say, that company changed the game. But he had to decide just how far he was willing to go to make that happen. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from Marcus. We need to talk. There's a proposal from the board. It's big and it could change everything. Jaylen stared at the screen for a moment, uncertainty creeping in. He knew that the moment was coming, the moment when he would have to decide whether to stay true to his principles or compromise for the sake of the company's survival. He didn't want to lose sight of what had brought him here, but he also knew that the world didn't always allow for such purity. Sometimes you had to make hard choices to protect the bigger picture. He stood up, the decision looming over him. It was time to meet Marcus. Time to face whatever the board was proposing. Whatever it was clear that it would determine the future of both the company and his personal legacy. The clock was ticking, and Jaylen was more determined than ever to fight for the future he envisioned. No matter what the board decided, no matter what the critics said, he wasn't going down without a fight. The stakes were too high, and this time he was ready to play the game his way. Jaylen arrived at the meeting room, his mind racing with possibilities. As he stepped inside, Marcus was already there, waiting. The tension in the air was palpable. The board's proposal had already been circulated among the key members, and Jaylen could feel the weight of their expectations hanging over him. Jaylen, we need to talk about the future, Marcus said, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of concern. The board wants to make a move, one that could either secure Apex's future or risk everything we've built. Jaylen nodded, taking a seat across from Marcus. He knew this was the moment that would define everything. The proposal, he suspected, was going to be their version of a solution. Something that would force him to either compromise his vision or risk losing control of the very company he had worked so hard to create. What are they suggesting? Jaylen asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. Marcus handed him a folder. They want to make significant changes in leadership, starting with you. Jaylen's pulse quickened, but he kept his composure. Go on. They're proposing a new strategic direction, one that takes a more traditional approach to growth. The foundation, your social initiatives, those will take a back seat. They want to focus on expanding operations, cutting costs, and strengthening profits. They believe that if Apex continues down the current path, it could alienate too many of its investors. Jaylen flipped through the proposal, his eyes scanning the words. It was everything he had feared. The board was willing to sacrifice the soul of the company for short-term gains. They were willing to overlook the values that Apex had always stood for in favor of a quick, profitable fix. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "And what do they want me to do?" he asked quietly. "They want you to step down as CEO," Marcus said bluntly. "They'll give you a significant package, of course, but they believe it's time for new leadership. They're offering a choice: step aside or face a shareholder revolt." Jaylen's heart sank. He had known the pressure was coming, but to hear it so plainly, it was a different kind of betrayal. He had built this company from the ground up, pouring his heart, soul, and countless hours of hard work into it. And now the board wanted to throw it all away for the sake of stability. They were asking him to turn his back on everything he had worked for: the values, the change, the vision for the future of aviation. "Are you suggesting that I just give up everything I fought for?" Jaylen asked, his voice steady but the fire in his eyes unmistakable. "That I let them turn Apex into just another company that chases profits, regardless of the cost?" Marcus shook his head, his expression sympathetic but firm. "I'm not suggesting anything, Jaylen. I'm just telling you the facts. You've always been a fighter, but this is different. This is a battle where the stakes are higher than just your pride. The company's future is at risk, and the board thinks you're too far gone to lead Apex into the next phase." Jaylen stood up, pacing the room as his thoughts collided in a chaotic swirl. He had always known that he would have to make tough decisions, but this was something he had never anticipated. To give in to the board's demands would mean abandoning everything he believed in, but to stand his ground would mean risking the future of Apex, the company he had built with his blood, sweat, and tears. "Why are they doing this now?" Jaylen finally asked, looking at Marcus. "Why didn't they bring this up before? Why wait until we've gained some ground?" Marcus sighed, clearly understanding the frustration and confusion in Jaylen's voice. "They've been pushing for a while, but the rally, the foundation, it's all too public now. Too much attention. The shareholders are nervous, and they're using it as leverage to force their hand." Jaylen stared out the window, the Chicago skyline stretching before him, a metaphor for everything he had built. Every decision he had made had led him here, to this pivotal moment. The foundation, the company, his legacy, all of it hung in the balance. "I didn't come this far just to let them tear everything down," Jaylen muttered, his voice filled with quiet resolve. Marcus met his gaze. "Then you need to decide what kind of fight you want to have. This isn't just about winning a boardroom battle. This is about your future and the future of Apex. If you walk away now, you'll lose it all. If you stay, you'll have to fight harder than you ever have before." Jaylen took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling in. He could feel his resolve hardening, a determination unlike anything he had felt before. He had built Apex to be a symbol of something bigger, a company that stood for opportunity, for change, for doing things the right way. If he gave in now, if he allowed them to strip it all away, he would be no better than the very system he had spent his life trying to change. With a slow, steady exhale, Jaylen turned to Marcus. "I'm not walking away. I'm going to fight for Apex, for everything it stands for. I'll take this to the shareholders, the media. Hell, I'll take it to the people. I won't let the board destroy what we've worked so hard to build." Marcus nodded, his expression firm with understanding. "You'll need support, Jaylen. The board won't go down without a fight." "I don't need them," Jaylen said, his voice unwavering. "I built this company from the ground up, and I'll rebuild it if I have to. I'm not giving up on my vision." As Jaylen walked out of the meeting room, his heart pounded with a mixture of adrenaline and fear. The fight was far from over. It had only just begun. But for the first time in a long while, Jaylen felt certain about his next step. He was done compromising. This time he was going to fight for Apex, for his legacy, and for the future he believed in.